Hey, what's going on, guys? We're back for a new review, and in this video we're going to be doing a review of the brand new Bloc Party album, Alpha Games. So, British alternative rock band Bloc Party, who broke into the scene from arguably their biggest and most acclaimed album, Silent Radio. But it seems like, despite how big and successful this album is, and how much of a following it has garnered, and how much people still repute it as a cult classic, it seems like none of Bloc Party's albums that followed up have managed to garner anywhere near as much critical acclaim or attention as Silent Radio. Even though I would argue that albums like Weekend in the City or 4 have some moments that are on par with some of the best moments from Silent Radio and are both great albums. But then you have other moments where the band is shown venturing into different territories, like on their last album, Hymns, which received very mixed reception from both fans and critics alike, but it showed them at least doing something different, venturing into areas of gospel and synth pop, and in some ways doing it fairly well, but in other ways, kind of the opposite. But on this new album, Alpha Games, the band have essentially gone back to the basics here. Not as exactly back to basics, as there are a lot of influences of 70s dance rock, as well as a little bit of psychedelic rock, even if in a lot of ways these genres colliding together don't exactly collide very well. Because yes, while this album may be considered a return to form to some fans, it's not exactly the best return to form, and the results here are kind of messy. You have a lot of moments where Keeley's vocals here are very mixed bag in terms of how well they're executed. You have some parts where, once again, he is producing that great flavor, that great blend between spoken word and singing, but there are other times where he just comes across quite awkward. The songwriting on this album, for the most part, is very weak compared to the songwriting on other projects. The production on this album is not on par with the production of some of their other albums. Even Hymns, despite its problems, one of the big things I did enjoy about it was the production and the way some of these instrumentals were mixed on some of the tracks. But on this album, it seems like on certain tracks here, there are examples of just layers upon layers, just not contrasting well. This includes tracks such as The Girls Are Fighting, which was a single to this. The guitars with the high-pitched, auto-tuned effects just sound awful, mixed with the more deeper guitar layers, and the typical bass here, which obviously on this album the bass is still continuing to prevail here, but aligned with the rest of these instrumentals and the rest of these issues this album faces, it doesn't really stand out as much as it would on other projects. But going back to this particular song, it's mixed poorly, the vocals from Keeley are also kind of cringe, and some of the lyrics here, like the lemonade vodka reference, and the hook here, while it is catchy, not exactly in a good way. The girls are fighting and the boys can't cope. And there are many examples on this album where there's just maybe one part here, one element that works well, but it's just ruined by the rest of the elements. Like, for example, the song Callum is a Snake has some great percussion, some great performance from the drums, but just completely ruined as soon as the guitar pops in. And it's also one of the shorter songs on this album and doesn't really serve much of a purpose, so it kind of just comes and goes. It's really a moment that I could do with or without, to be honest. And then we have the song Traps, which instrumentally is one of the better tracks here. The bass and the drums coincide so well together. The groove is pretty tight and pretty cool, but Keeley's vocals here are just not on point. While yes, Keeley has always been known for his eccentric, out there deliveries mixed with spoken word, on this one it just comes across a bit much, especially with some of those cringe lyrics. So yeah, for the most part, that seems to be what this album's going for. It's just a mess. There are either tracks here that are just a mess, tracks where some elements work well and others don't, or just tracks that are just borderline generic. And these include songs such as Of Things Yet to Come and You Should Know the Truth, which just, You Know the Truth has one of the most generic guitar rhythms on the entire album. One of the most generic that the band has done in a while. Just doesn't correlate with Keeley's eccentric vocals, but even his vocals here are not really on point, and it seems like on this track, as well as Of Things Yet to Come, it seems like he's not doing a really good job at balancing out the spoken word mixed with the vocals, and it sounds too much like he's just speaking, but in a more empathetic tone, more so than singing. With that said though, this album does have its share of a few highlights here. Like the song Day Drinker, which is the opening here, which I consider to be a solid opening. I do love how the guitar goes from heavier to a bit more melodic. It transcends quite smoothly. The drums also find a nice home behind this well-crafted instrumental, and Kiele's vocals here really suit it, and I do actually like some of the lyrics on this song. We have the song Rough Justice, which I think out of all of these tracks is the only song on this album that I would see myself coming back to in the future. A song that I would actually consider one of the band's best songs in years. From the dark, gritty guitar chords that's layered in the first half, to the zany vocal deliveries and the chemistry between the bass and the drums provided here, as well as the other extra layers we get that, for once, are actually mixed well. It's a great time overall. And not to mention the strings that are also placed in here in between the guitars here, which actually mix very well. And that's another thing with this album. There are some extra instrumentals, some extra layers here, and I know that hymns utilize more synths as well as organs, and in some ways, they could have really been mixed a little bit better, or could have had a little bit more work done to make them sound a little bit more authentic. But at least there were some tracks on that album where they actually sounded beautiful and actually really fitted. But for the most part on this album, aside from the strings that I did talk about in Rough Justice, there are other examples on this album where these extra instrumentals just don't really do much at all. Like the song In Situ, which I will admit has one of my favorite hooks here, but the instrumental is just a mess, and the EDM-inspired chords and equalizers that you hear behind the instrumental, are the band really attempting dubstep here? Because if so, they're not even doing it well. And even if they were, this style of dubstep is just something that sounds like trying to fit into your pajamas from 10 years ago. Thankfully though, just like how this album started off well, it also ends well with the song A Peace Offering, which the instrumental here is quite straightforward. I like the progressive nature on it, from at the beginning where it's a bit more acoustic and a little bit more softer, to obviously how it gets a bit heavier and a little bit more cathartic towards the end, and how Kiele's spoken words become from normal to angry, and I do really like that, and I think it leads to a good closing on this album. But yeah, overall guys, this album was kind of a slog, kind of a mess, really one of the band's worst projects, and coming from someone who actually admires Bloc Party for Bloc Party and not just Bloc Party for silent radio like a lot of other people do. I actually think that silent radio is a little bit overrated, but I still do really like the album, but I love a lot of other albums that the band have made beyond that point, but this album is just not an example of that. It's probably the worst album the band has ever written, and the worst album they've ever recorded, as the mixing here is very rushed. The layering, the instrumentals just either don't do much or just ruin it. Some of Kiele's vocals are either on par and probably just on par with some of his average vocal performances from some of his older projects, or just really lacking here. The songwriting is also very weak on this album, and overall, conceptually, this album is just put together in a bad way, and there's no sort of concept that this album provides with the way it's put together and the way the tracks are structured. Just, yeah, it's a mess overall. So overall, I'm going to give Alpha Games a strong 4 out of 10. Well, anyway, that's pretty much going to wrap up this review. So if you guys enjoyed the video, let me know with a like, comment, subscribe, tell me what you thought of this album, what's your favorite track, what's your least favorite track, how would you rank this album among Bloc Party's discography? Let me know. But until then, guys, I'll catch you in the next review. So stay tuned and take care. Bye-bye.